Welcome into the Storycraft Cafe. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Today, super excited to have Steve Beaulieu slash Jaime Castle, uh, owner of Athon Books and also a science fiction and fantasy author, and the co-author of a brand new book that just released today, An Unexpected Hero, a lit RPG adventure. Steve and I were talking about this a little while back, and I have a bit of old man disease where I have not been able to fully wrap my head around what lit RPG is and why the fascination with it over the last couple of years. And Steve said, "Well, Rhett and I have a new book coming out. Why don't we talk about it when it comes out?" And I said, "Perfect, let's do that." So I've had a chance to read the book. Phenomenal, amazing, so much better than I anticipated because I went into the book with zero expectation, which is one of the best ways to take on something new. You can't be disappointed, but you also, you just go in and just let the thing be what it is, and I'm so glad I did. Also joining us because Rhett had an emergency and couldn't come at the last minute. Um, Jeff Hayes is the narrator of the audiobook. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
And I've had an opportunity to listen to the audiobook. What an amazing, perfect performance that Jeff did on this book. So Jeff was kind enough to pop in for the first few minutes of the show here to talk a little bit with us. So welcome, Steve. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you so
us.
much.
Absolutely. So Jeff, since you have a short amount of time, um, tell us about your involvement in this project. I understand that you are no newcomer to the genre. What is it about this genre particularly that draws you in? And I can't say enough about your performance on this. What do you think this genre or this subgenre specifically allows you to bring to the project as a voice actor, as a character actor? Really, I mean, you bring so much more to the project than just someone reading the book. How do you approach it, and what do you think this subgenre specifically uh, brings to to the audiobook world specifically?
I think personally, what makes lit RPG so much fun to narrate
Yeah,
is what do they call it when something is out of time? Like it's in a different like it's clearly not in its right time period.
right.
What is that called? Well, that's what it is that I think makes it
Anachronistic.
anachronistic, right? The characters are because lit RPG is basically a subgenre of fantasy. I mean, some people
Right.
would argue that it's sci-fi because there's sci-fi reasons why people play the video games, but
Sure.
all in all, usually what we're dealing with is a fantasy aesthetic. We're dealing with, medieval times and low tech and high magic, right? And so what you get is these players of video games or people who have knowledge of video games in these settings where video game elements are being thrust upon them. Um, you get these normal people from our time period
You said
talking.
thrust.
I did say thrust. It was in honor of our release today. So
You
yeah,
said release.
I think it's a combination of okay, it's fun action, it's fun magic, right? It's all like the pulp that you really like from fantasy, but you also get to have fun playing modern characters, and that makes it like a little bit of a challenge, but also just a little bit more fun. You don't have to be gloomy and dramatic about everything, right?
Yeah.
It can all be fun, and it lends itself well to humor, and I think that this book is a giant demonstration of that.
Yeah.
Just that, in fact, not only does the anachronism come in from the way that the character speaks and the way he thinks, right, but also from the culture that he brings, right? Like the main character is a musician, and he's very much a child of the 90s, and so he does tons of references to 90s music. He plays 90s music, and he thinks about it from that sort of rock star angle that a bard from those medieval times maybe wouldn't. Back in medieval
Right.
times, bards were like super low caste. like the kind of like around the same social status as prostitutes and stuff back then. So like bards were not really well liked except for, you know, the very highest of them, the very best out there. So you know, he takes that rock star mentality and he comes and becomes very disappointed by how not like that it is in the lit RPG world, in the fantasy world. So not, and I would say the last thing is just all the video game language. I'm a gamer. I've been playing video games since I can remember being alive. I think I was playing Doom on my on my dad's 386 when
Oh
I was
yeah.
probably like 3 or 4 years old, and playing other, you know, other point and
Silently
click
judging your
adventures.
father right now.
For having a 386 or for letting me play Doom.
Yes.
Yes. So I understand the language, and so it's very easy for me to convincingly use it.
Yeah. I see in your background there, Jeff, that you've got an electric guitar, a Strat style, the blue in there, and then I believe
That's a precision bass. Yep.
okay, okay, and then I was going to say that is that a bass beside it, the headstock there. There is music, little interludes in the audiobook. Did you record that as well as the?
I wanted to. I
Yeah,
really wanted to do it myself. I love learning new instruments, but I'm also, as the CEO of an audiobook production company, incredibly busy.
I bet.
And so I was never able to commit the kind of time I needed to in order to practice it up and compose the songs that we needed.
That
But
didn't stop either of us from buying a lute
that's correct.
at
Both
all.
of us bought lutes, but I ended up giving
As
mine
one
to
does.
Aaron J. Morton, the lead composer here at Sound Booth Theater, who is
Okay.
actually his main instrument is the mandolin. So it was a relatively
Gotcha.
easy transition for him.
Right.
It's still a pain in the ass instrument. Don't get me wrong. Everybody hates playing the lute.
So is the lute strung like a mandolin or is it strung like a guitar?
It's more similar to a mandolin than a guitar.
Okay. Okay.
It's
So
a little
that's
wild, right? Because there's 13 string ones, there's 15 string ones, and as a guitar player looking at
Right.
it, like Jeff, you'll say like we could figure some stuff out, right?
Yeah.
But like it's not super intuitive in
right.
terms of translating guitar skill to the lute.
Yeah, and it's mainly the right hand, honestly, because it's such a delicate instrument. Because everything that's holding onto it is very loose. It takes almost no force to make it sound buzzy and gross with your right hand. So you really have to like, you know, like it's a you have to be really gentle with it. And the fretboard's about that wide, so
Right.
it's kind of hard to do real chords with it. A lot of you have to be clever about how you do the fingering in order to get anything good out of it. The frets are actually strings. The frets are strings themselves, so they can
It's
be
classical
moved.
strings. Yep.
So no wonder you get fret buzz if you
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
finger it just right.
The tuners are wood pegs that you shove them into a wood hole, and then you hope that it's tight enough in that hole.
And if it's not, you got to have like wood. What are they?
wood
Peg
putty,
peg
peg
putty.
peg putty. That's what I was using
Yeah.
to make sure that it was enough friction to keep it tuned, but not enough friction to damage it. It's just it is a
Jeez.
pain. Oh, and it's just impossible to keep in tune. So
I'll bet.
it was an absolute nightmare to play. Even though I like eventually had fun, I never was able to get to the point where it was actually going to sound good for me to play what was necessary for the book. So Aaron J. Morton, thank you, buddy, for rolling in and covering for us. And honestly, he did a better job than I would have anyway. So I think it's a win for everybody.
Right. Well, Jeff, since speaking of audiobooks and audiobook production and being the owner of an audiobook company, we talk about this a fair amount. That there seems to be this renaissance, this golden age of audiobooks right now, and it's probably the last decade it has really exploded. Now we've had books on tape for as long as you can remember, and books on CD, and anyone that's ever been to the public library has seen, shelves and shelves of books that you can check out. Um, but something has changed over this last decade specifically. What is it that has caused this audiobook explosion, and what do you attribute that to?
I think number one, it's things that you've already actually mentioned. They were books on tape or books on
Right.
CD, and because of that, if you're listening to an audiobook on cassette tape, that means you're listening to like 20 tapes for, a 10 hour. Well, no, 20 tapes for how much could fit on a cassette? What, like 30 minutes aside?
Yeah, there's usually 60 minutes, which was
60
30
minutes
minutes
total.
aside. Yeah.
So yeah, 10 tapes for a 10-hour book. For this book, for Unexpected Hero, it would have been 16 tapes.
Wow.
So that's one thing. People don't want to they don't want to have to carry a whole case of tapes around with them everywhere they go to listen to something. So even back when people were listening to cassettes as music, for their music, it was one tape per album. So
Yeah.
it wasn't that much of an inconvenience. Um, CDs aren't that much better when it comes to how much you can fit on one CD. So that's one thing. Number two, Audible. The opposite side is the exact taking advantage of the format, right? On
Right.
Audible, you download the file to your phone. You can listen to the whole thing from beginning to end. It takes up, if you're dealing with a really big book, 700 to 800 meg. And it's easy to download and delete from your phone. It's really convenience. That's made it easier for people to consume. Also, people discovering that they can listen during work, during
Right.
their commute. People who really love books, and like anybody who's a publisher knows that there's an audience out there. There's people out there who read many books per week. And so those types of people, if they can fit more books into their schedule, they will. And the way to do that is to listen, and listen to it while you're occupied with something else that wouldn't have allowed you to read in the first place.
I think that's what made me a listener, was that I was a voracious reader growing up, and adulthood hit, and all the things that come along with adulthood, and jobs and this and that and family, and I found myself having to choose between reading and watching television, and I hated that choice. But like most times, it was watching TV, because I kind of fall asleep while watching TV. And so when audiobooks became kind of on my radar, 2017 or so is when I really jumped into audiobooks from the library, snagging them from the library, whatever. I went, holy crap, I could read these books by listening to them. And not only that, but they're performed, not just read, right? Because I do remember the old cassette tapes, and like most of them were just sort of read,
Mhm.
weren't really performed. I had like Terry Goodkind's Sword of Truth or whatever that was called, and there was some performance in that. But like what Jeff and the team over at Sound Booth is doing is eons beyond what most people are doing with books, and that's why we had to have him for this project. Of course, Jeff and I thankfully are good friends anyway, and I hope he would have said yes, even if he just hated the book. But uh, I don't think he did, so that's good.
No, they made sure. They made sure. I was like, I
What?
read over it. I read over it before they finished editing it and everything, and like gave them the thumbs up. I think they did a great job.
But he also gave some really great input that we took to heart, and we changed some things that I think made it overall a much better book. And that's the collaboration that Rhett and I are very used to as co-authors, where somebody says, hey, this is good, but like this could be better. And instead of having, this, those are my darlings attitude, we're just like, yeah, no, that's a great idea. Let's fix that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Jeff, I know you're short for time, but I really have one other question that I
Sure,
want
sure.
to specifically ask you. Um, since more authors are writing books that they know will be translated to audio, do you notice manuscripts coming to you that it feels like the author has taken that into account? Like I ask authors, has the rise of audiobooks changed the way you write? But when you get a manuscript sent to you, do you notice that it feels like authors are writing more toward this format, this form?
I've only noticed it from the authors who have worked with me before,
Okay.
right? Because I think that it depends on the narrator that you're working with, whether or not what you do to the script translates to audio in a different way. So, the way that I work with my authors is more of a partnership than like me just doing a job for someone. And so it's naturally has a collaborative feel when we're interacting with each other and when we're actually recording the audiobook. And so I think just naturally a lot of the authors that I work with on a regular basis, they just have that process in their mind as they're writing. And even if they don't notice it, I'm pretty sure that's what's happening in their head. They're kind of picturing how these things will play out in audio as they're writing, and maybe there's an editing process in their head that's just automatically happening while they're doing it. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Gotcha. Well, what sort of books does your company specialize in, Jeff?
LitRPG.
That's
LitRPG
awesome.
is our main focus. And by the way, guys, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to peace out of
Yep.
here. But yeah, check out Sound Booth Theater on Audible. We have tons of lit RPGs on there, and we even have our own platform, soundbooththeater.com. Go check out what we do there. On there, we do more of our cinematic audio, which is Unexpected Hero has a taste of our cinematic
Yeah.
production methods, but it was much too long of a book, and we had way too many things on our plate already to go the full cinematic route. Plus, we kind of save cinematic for our platform anyway. This is an Audible production, so we're putting it out there
Excellent.
with the way it is. It's still a blast, and we still had a lot of fun doing the production, but it is 16 hours. So
Wow.
like having the whole
Yeah.
thing done in full cinematic audio would have been hard. But full cast, sound effects, music, that's our goal. We want to do more and more of that stuff, and that's mainly on soundbooththeater.com.
Excellent.
All right.
Thanks for joining us, Jeff. Thank you for
Thank you,
taking
Hank.
time, and
Thank you,
come back
Steve.
and hang out with us
Yep.
again
Thanks for coming,
sometime.
Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. Just if I get a little bit more notice, I can make sure to make time. But you guys have a good
Absolutely.
rest of your day. I got my fingers crossed. Let's see how people like Unexpected Hero.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff.
Well,
Steve, what a great guy. That
he
was so
is.
nice of him to join us at the last minute.
He is, and I apologize. I was a little distracted. Today is the release date, so like everything is hitting me all at once here. So I'm trying to like
Bet.
juggle a lot of stuff around. So I could actually answer your question from an author's perspective.
Yeah.
When Rhett and I write, we write for audio. I generally don't care about the ebook as much as audio.
And I kind of knew that, but I wanted to ask him his perspective. But go ahead and elaborate on that. What
Jeff was a little different because
Yeah.
typically I'll write a book knowing who the narrator is going to be, and I did know that Jeff was going to be the narrator. But Jeff is so charismatic, and his characters are so real and alive that I didn't truly know what he was going to do with some of the characters until I actually did a like 3 or 4 day direction session with him, doing a live cold reads on Discord. And so we got to kind of play with the characters together and go, okay, Kerr should be this kind of Russian/German/barbarian. One of the things we tried to do with this book was break some of the stereotypes of, barbarian is just a Viking or whatever.
Right.
And, even the elves are Italian, right? Like that was something that we specifically, and as when I told Jeff that, we said that Danny mentioned that they sounded Italian. He was like, an elf Italian? I'm like, yeah, no one's done that I know of. And like, I like the idea of it not just being this sort of highbrow British character that
Right.
we see, but in previous situations, I typically always know who the narrator is going to be. So I could listen to their books and get a feel for the voices that they could do and all of that. But I typically will just hand off the book to the narrator, and I won't have quite as much, hands-on experience or hands-on one-on-one time with the narrator.
Mm-hmm.
Like before we recorded this, Jeff flew down or drove down to Texas and stayed at my house for a few days, and we noodled around with loots and all this stuff. And we were able to kind of discuss the things that we wanted to do. And as you're listening, you'll hear the character Screeny is not even remotely close to the voice that I had in mind. When Rhett and I wrote that, like we thought, Dungeon Crawler Carl, of course, is a really big lit RPG, and Jeff is the narrator of Dungeon Crawler Carl. So it was very difficult to not write the AI character with Jeff's most famous AI voice in mind. even going into it knowing he's not going to want to do the same thing that he already did in a very big series, I didn't know what to expect. So he gave him this kind of Scottish thing, and at first I'm like, really, Scottish? He's like, just trust me. And then, of course, as we're sitting around my patio table, he starts reading a script in the voice. I'm like, oh yeah, that's Screeny, and I never would have thought Screeny would be this Scottish thing.
It's so good, so good.
Thank you. And he does such a great job. I even texted him in the middle. You know, we've had these audio files for a really long time, but there's so much extra music, sound effects, all kinds of stuff, and not extreme like some of the graphic audio stuff where it's just sort of overwhelming. They do it very tastefully. Not to throw shade at graphic audio, I don't mean that at all, but go ahead.
It's just little drop-ins.
Yep.
It's not where if you and graphic audio I think is a great comparison, because graphic audio really paints a whole soundscape, and it's not that. It's tasteful little drop-ins where it doesn't feel like there's a tapestry behind the audio. It's just little tasteful drop-ins, and that's not doing it any justice, I know, but I can't think to describe it any other way. It's just little tasteful nuggets that just add to the experience without feeling like you're just being inundated.
Yeah, graphic audio does a great job at what they do, but it's not really for me. First of all, they abridge books.
Right.
And they, you know, one thing that I love that Jeff doesn't do is he doesn't take out text because it's already, you know, being performed.
Right.
However, you know, there are some books that I think that they've done that they do that, right? Take out the he says and she says, but like Rhett and I just happen to write in such a way that we don't have a lot of that because we expect for the reader to pick up on it. But I texted Jeff while I was in the middle of listening to it, and I'm like, man, you just had such a wildly strong impression of who these characters were.
Right.
Because I'm not against adverbs. You know, if adverbs are necessary in a book, whatever, but I don't typically tell you how a character performs a specific line. I will not say he said it sarcastically. I'm hoping that the words that are spoken imply the sarcasm.
Right.
And Jeff just nailed it every single time. I'm like, that is exactly how I meant this character to say.
Yeah. And it makes you feel good as a writer that you, I mean, even if it's an audience of one, like this was, you nailed it. You got it across. That has to be a bit of a, I don't want to say an ego stroke, but it's a confirmation.
Yeah, it's validation that I did a thing, you know.
Exactly.
And just so you know, I say I a lot. I am talking about me and Rhett, but Rhett's not here. It's a confirmation that
Rhett wouldn't show up today, so we can speak for him. Yeah.
It's just, what we did was right. And it was cool. We talked and he's like, hey, who do you think Danny is? And, you know, generally when a narrator says that, we're talking like compare it to an actor, compare it to somebody familiar. And I said immediately Ryan Reynolds, and Jeff was like, that is my take as well. And if you're listening to it, you know, Dungeon Crawler Carl, he plays Patrick, what's the guy's name? He played in the cartoon Emperor's New Groove. Shoot, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. He's very, very familiar actor. He was in Seinfeld as Elaine's boy. No. He was Elaine's boyfriend in the car salesman in Yellow Sob. You want a Yellow Sob? Anyway, I can't remember his name.
Oh, I know who. Yeah.
But, you know, Jeff nailed that really well. And then we said Ryan Reynolds. And if you listen to this book, you're like, oh, shoot. Yeah, that is totally an analog of Ryan Reynolds in the best kind of way.
So, I love it. Well, you know, you and I have had this discussion a couple of times, and I lazily said, I don't really understand LitRPG, and I really don't want to understand it. It's just kind of whatever. I just don't have room in my life to expand my literary palette much more, and which I think is an honest assessment, but it's not fair. Because I absolutely love this book, and it was not anything that I expected. When I say I went in with a clean palette, not expecting much of anything because I didn't know what to expect. I had the best time with this book. And I would not classify myself as a gamer. I was a gamer 20 years ago, but then I had kids and I didn't get to have any personal time whatsoever for 20 years. So I didn't get to game and all of that completely left me. I was an 8-bit gamer, and that's about where my maturity level is because I never moved past that. So modern gaming kind of befuddles me in a way, and so I don't understand a lot of the nomenclature or a lot of the uh the just the thought process that goes into gaming anymore. I feel like it has moved past me. So I kind of had that sort of prejudice when I started thinking about this subgenre of fantasy sci-fi. But it's so much fun. And you don't have to be steeped in that culture. I would imagine that if you are steeped in that culture, they're probably, and I just lost Steve. Um but there are probably lots of inside jokes that are there. And let's see if we can get Steve back. Sorry about that, everybody. I guess that's the downside of living on the internet. Hang on one second. Let's see if we can get Steve back. Bear with us just a second, everybody, as we try to resolve this technical glitch. Let me see if I can send Steve a text real quick. Well, while we're waiting for Steve, I'm going to show you the new book that just came out today. Whoop, there we go. An Unexpected Hero, a lit RPG adventure. And like we were saying earlier, the audiobook is absolutely phenomenal. But this Unexpected Hero, written by Rhett, Bruno, and Jaime Castle. Jaime Castle is a pen name for Steve Beaulieu. This book is in Kindle Unlimited if you are a Kindle Unlimited subscriber. And also available in audio. Let's see if we've heard from. I'm assuming that Steve had an internet outage. Well, I just tried to give Steve a call and didn't get an answer. Well, oh, the wonders of live broadcasting. Coming up on the Dabble YouTube channel coming up this week, we've got some more events for you. While we wait for Steve to reconnect, I'm gonna look at the upcoming events this week. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, our standard podcast time, as we jokingly refer to it. We've got Writing Sprint Wednesdays, where Doug and I we typically do two 20-minute sprints where we as a group all get together and we write together. Usually I'll take one 20-minute sprint and Doug will take the other, and we'll fire up some great background writing music on our own PCs. It's not, everyone doesn't have to listen to the same thing, but Doug and I are each working on existing books that we're going through, and we invite you to come right along with us, and we see how many words we can write as a group. Lately, we as a group have been writing 2,500 to 3,500 words. And there's Steve. But can't hear you, Steve.
Can you hear me?
There you are. There you are.
I had to go unplug my internet, plug it back in. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened.
I figured something like that happened. So I was just telling folks of some upcoming events coming up while we were waiting for you to get your internet resolved. Yet nothing like live broadcasting to, especially when you depend on the internet to do it. Trying to remember, what were we saying? I was saying that
RPG. So
yeah, and I was saying that I would imagine if you are steeped in the culture, there are probably some inside jokes that just kind of went over my head, because I'm assuming that you're really tapping into the subculture and the kind of the common nomenclature and inside jokes and things like that. But my whole point was, you don't have to be. It's so much fun just as a novice gamer and someone that doesn't quite understand the culture. Still so much fun. Did Was that something that you tried to be cognizant of, that this is going to be a niche readership, but I want to be a big umbrella that doesn't isolate people?
So Athon is one of, if not the largest publisher of LitRPG in the
Right.
world. And so we've got everything from on both sides, both extremes of what you're talking about, where like a book might only appeal to somebody who's a reader. And what Rhett and I aim to do with this is bring a little bit of the mainstream readership into a place where they can tap in and understand what's going on without having to know all of the things that you're talking about knowing. Like, we do our best to explain even something as simple as, we have Screeny explain what dexterity is, right? I know dexterity is a word that, you use outside of gaming, but there's sort of a specific attribution to that word when you're talking about gaming. And, we wanted people to be able to read this and not feel lost. There are a lot of LitRPG progression fantasy books out there where you might pick it up and it's just heavy. It's very, very heavy in terms of, you have to be a gamer. And I think that Jeff mentioned video games a lot, but the reality is all of this stemmed more from Dungeons and Dragons,
Right,
than video games. I mean, the argument could be made that video games stole from D&D. Like, D&D's
Sure.
been around since the 70s. Video games had their inception in the 70s, but we didn't get role-playing games until, I don't know, the 90s as far as video games go. Or at least in the
late 90s. if you're talking about good games.
Yeah. Especially the massive multiplayer online type stuff. And, I remember playing things like, I don't know, Bard's Tale was a little bit of a role-playing game back in the day.
Yeah.
And that's one of the inspirations for this. So You Want to Be a Hero, Hero's Quest. This book was originally called So You Want to Be a Hero. And then we decided to kind of separate ourselves from that IP a little bit, because it's not that. And we didn't want people to think this was a Sierra Games IP.
Yeah.
But that was a huge inspiration for this, because like I love Bard's Tale, and I love that adventure type thing that Sierra Games was doing in the early 90s. But that said, like, yes, Rhett and I intentionally made it palatable for all audiences, or what we hope to be all audiences. Another thing to really comment on LitRPG, I was recently on a panel at DragonCon, and I was on a panel with several other publishers and authors, and there's a little bit of an argument that I have in lighthearted argument that I have with a lot of authors and publishers, that I don't believe people choose LitRPG. I believe that LitRPG chooses them, the wizard. The wand chooses the wizard, Harry.
Right.
But I think that what happened over these past few years is that fantasy morphed into LitRPG in a way that most people didn't realize it was happening. They saw a book on Amazon or Audible. It looked like a cool fantasy. They picked it up and ended up having stats and systems and these things that were not common elements in a regular fantasy book. And they went, I guess this is sort of new fantasy. And then over the course of time, they realized, oh, this is a subgenre of fantasy, and it's called progression fantasy or LitRPG or game lit. And then they went, I really love this thing. And they sought out more of the same. So I don't think that even today, I think we're still in the infancy of the genre. I don't think people are going, let me find LitRPG. They're going, I want a new fantasy book, and discovering. And so I'm glad that we hit that mark, that you were able to enjoy it, although you don't have all the gaming, knowledge of the past 20 years.
Right. One thing people have said to me is that, well, did you like Ready Player One? And I'm like, well, sure. I mean, Ready Player One was a great book. I really enjoyed it. Are there problems with Ready Player One? 100%. Especially if you go back and reread Ready Player One. It's usually not as good on a reread as it is the first time. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Nostalgia, clouds a lot of things. And, that's a whole other discussion. And this book has a little bit of that, but there's one really distinct difference, especially in the beginning. This is a
Isekai.
Okay, explain that.
Isekai is the official word for portal fantasy. So you'll remember R.A. Salvatore had a book called Lost in the Woods. I believe it was called Spear Wielder's Tale. Yeah. There's quite a bit of portal fantasy. Narnia was a portal fantasy. So the term for that is isekai. It's a German term. A Japanese term. I don't know why German. It's a Japanese term.
Yeah. And I'm a huge portal fantasy fan. I love the idea of being in the real world and falling into this other world. I love that. I think some very amazing books have been written around that concept. But yeah, this and in the beginning of this book, Danny, the protagonist, is not necessarily a likable guy. I would argue that you went out of your way to make him unlikable. And instead of Ready Player One, where they purposefully go through this portal into the other world, he finds himself there by no decision of his own. And then the world is thrust upon him instead of him entering the world. So there's a slight difference there, but I think it's a meaningful difference, because that then depends on how the story unfolds from there. What is that main difference for you in the typical portal fantasy where the protagonist is where the world is thrust upon the protagonist and not him entering of his own free will? What does that do for the way the story is told and the scope of adventure that awaits him?
Well, the term we use for that is truck-kun.
Okay.
truck, KUN, and the concept there is that in a lot of Japanese stories, somebody gets hit by a truck and they end up in another world. This one, he gets punched in the face by a biker, and
Right.
winds up in another world. Danny, in so many ways, it's very hard not to write yourself into stories. In many ways, like Danny, I feel like is a pretty good example of me. There's a bit of me in Danny. There's a bit of me in Screeny. Screeny can just say whatever crazy, ridiculous jokes he wants and gets away with it. Yes.
I couldn't help but picture you on an Ozfest stage, and you winding up in this book.
Danny, I joke with my wife all the time, and I say, like, I don't know why anyone likes me because I'm an asshole. And I think she said to me, "You're a lovable asshole." Because
Touche.
I like to joke, I like to make fun. I'm not the nicest guy in the world, but when you say things with a smile and people feel like I jokingly tell people I only make fun of people I love. If I don't make fun of you, I don't have time to make fun of you.
Ooh.
Danny is that unlikable musician who has struggled to be in the place where he is right now, and he's not happy about where he is right
Yeah.
now. And there's a lot of bitterness and resentment and I think most musicians can relate to a guy who maybe had a good career and then ended up as a bar singer doing covers.
Oh, yeah. As someone, I live in a town that one of the main industries in this town was PV Electronics, that the music instrument and
Yep.
amp maker. And so everyone that lives in this town has done time at PV at one point or another. You want to see a town full of bar musicians that were going to be rock stars one day, and now, not so much. Yeah.
We had this story running on a website called Royal Road, which is where you can kind of post chapter by chapter and people give you input. You all have probably heard about it before, if not from me, from other people. But, one of the big comments we kept getting was, this guy is a musician. How come he's not playing his lute? And it's interesting because I feel like sometimes the readership, I love readers, but I do sometimes think that they fail to recognize the period of time that is going by in a lot of these stories. Like, this whole book takes place over the course of maybe about 5 days. And he went from a bar in Willistown, Illinois to Lord of the Rings land in an instant.
Right.
And he is trying to figure out what the hell is going on. He spends a lot of that time wondering if he's dead, wondering if he's in a dream. And something that I think a lot of Portal Fantasy, and especially the newer LitRPG progression fantasy folks don't do, is the readers kind of want the character to immediately accept that they're in this new world and never think about their old world again. To me, as a writer, I can't do that. Rhett can't either. We're very traditional writers. We want our characters to experience the emotion of what they're going through in those moments. We want them to wonder if it used to be better. We want them to wonder if it could go, can I go back there? And the ultimate moment is when they go, maybe I don't want to go back there. Maybe things are better here. But that's the difference between choosing to go into the Oasis, right? Like, he's, what's his name? I can't remember his name in the book. It starts with an E, I think. He wants to go in because he wants to escape a thing that he has. And Danny doesn't realize he wants to escape something, but he is forced to escape that thing. And then ultimately realizes he wants to escape that thing. So,
well, I think one of the biggest things that I struggled with in trying to wrap my head around this genre was character development, and how do characters progress in this story, in this world, if they are just playing a character. Like, I didn't understand that. In this book, we definitely have a character arc. Is that something different that you are bringing to the genre and trying to expand the genre, or is that a typical hallmark of the genre? Or is character progression, even though these people are playing in a game or in an alternate world or in a portal, or is character progression still something that the writers are trying to develop throughout these stories?
Yeah, I think it's important to, at this point in the stage that we're at with progression fantasy, take out the element of games. The game element no longer exists, right? Like
Okay.
when this genre started, it was a whole lot of virtual reality. Person plugs
Right.
in. I even wrote a series. Person ends up in a massive multiplayer world, and they're a character in the game. Of course, there's still that person in the game, but there's not the same kinds of stakes. So you had to do something like they're stuck in the game and they can't get out, and how do they get out, and all this stuff. But we have gone
Right.
so far beyond the concept of this being a game. We now kind of use the term system as the explanation, right? There is no game. Danny's not in a game. There is, I know he gets knocked into an arcade and there's an electrical thing that happens, and that was just the truck con. That was just how he got there. He is not in a video game, and he's not a video game character. He is Danny Kendrick, and he is in this world called Athonia. See what I did there? He is there, and he's potentially never going back. And the difference between the real world medieval times and his world now, obviously other than magic and elves and orcs, is that there's this system that exists sort of only for him. And the world that he's in, and this happens a lot in progression fantasy, is just the world that they wind up in functions the way that we are familiar with gaming. Characters, people who are in that world have stats, and they have levels, and they have things that Screeny actually makes a lot of jokes about how it's not any different from the world that you're in on the earth, except here you can see a numerical value attached to it, right? If I'm really good at playing guitar, my playing skill in that is going to be much higher than somebody who's never picked up a guitar. I don't know what the numerical value is, but Screeny's able to give him that numerical value. And that's really the only difference. And Danny slowly starts to discover the fact that, like, he's not necessarily gaining skill that makes him better. That number goes up because he's getting better. So take out the gaming concept and just think of it more as a system that functions with gaming elements. And I think it changes the whole outlook of that genre.
It does. It does. 100% does. Is this a standalone? Is this the first in a series? And how do you okay. And I think that's the safe answer for any fantasy at this point. Publishers are definitely favoring series over standalone. I think it's been that way for a while. When you're writing a story like this, how do you think in series potential, while also delivering a solid installment that feels like a satisfying adventure?
I think the fun thing about this genre, and I don't know if I'm using the word fun right, is that so many of them are web serials that are 20 million words long before we even start publishing them on Amazon. And I'm not exaggerating, 20 million words. We're talking about tens and tens of books worth of material. The difference between what we're doing and what some of these web serials like He Who Fights with Monsters and Defiance of the Fall and all those is that we have distinct beginnings and ends of books. Some of those, we have to take them as the publisher and go, okay, where's a good ending spot for this? And it has to be somewhere around 250,000 words or less. Like, we can't have this massive tome. What Rhett and I did was we took sort of our traditional story arc telling history and applied it to this genre in such a way that we hope that when people read book one of this series, they go, oh, that was a great book, not that was a great beginning of the series, and now I have to listen. We want you to immediately grab it. So there's a little bit of a cliffhanger, but when we do cliffhangers, it's here's the setup for the next book, not you're not getting the end of this book. And I think that's what people get frustrated with cliffhangers, especially in this genre, is that some people, they just slice that book.
Right.
And it's because we have to. There's no good endpoint because it's an ongoing web serial that never ends. But that's also part of the fun of this genre, is that Danny's story, I think what people have glommed onto with web serials is that, I don't know, if you ever watched a TV show and you get to the end of it and you're like, it's clearly the end, but I really want to know what happens to the people next.
Right. Yeah.
Even if it's just their everyday life, like, you've come to love these people and you're like, well, what now? Like, this is great.
Yeah.
That's what the web serial delivers, is that there's sort of a never ending following of this character's life. So Danny, especially in a world as zany and crazy as we've created in Athonia, like Danny can have a never ending adventure, but
Mhm.
we're going to write endings to every book that we have so that you feel like you got this particular arc, it's done. And so,
Well, if you think about story structure, just about any structure that you do, if it's save the cat or if it's the snowflake method or whatever structure you're dealing with, you almost always start by showing what the character's normal everyday life is.
right.
And then some catalyst comes along and thrusts them into the story. And then, like you said, I think it's only, I think it, in a way, we want that satisfying return to normalcy. And what does their normal look like compared to the beginning? That's almost, I think not enough people focus on that full character arc to return us to that
See, and you
point.
typically never get the return to the original
Right,
world with
right. And I
progression
wish
fantasy.
more people would.
This might be a little bit of a spoiler here, but we don't intend Danny to go home. He might, there
Yeah.
might be a thing, right? I have no idea because we haven't gotten there yet. But the thing with some of these really long series is if we send him home like he's going back from Narnia, but people still want more of this world, we're done without some kind of hand waving him to get him back there again. He's there
Right.
by accident. He doesn't have a life that's another kind of trope with the progression fantasies. He doesn't have a life worth returning to.
Mhm.
Typically, a character in a progression fantasy has no parents, no loved ones, no girlfriend, no boyfriend, whatever it might be. They just don't have anything. They're done with the earth. And there is a sort of relief in being in a new place where they can reinvent themselves.
Right.
And Danny has gone through the gamut of I was a rock star, now I have nothing, and I don't know what to do with my life, to having sort of this. As a matter of fact, one of Screeny's objectives that he gives Danny is find your purpose here in Athonia. And that is going to be his unclosed objective through the end of this series. Because in reality, we never truly find our purpose. There's always something to unveil in life, right? I might get to a point in my own personal life where I go, this is my purpose. And then I was a pastor, right? I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus is unveiling that next step of our life every single time. And true purpose is not going to be found ever in this life. And then once we move on, so be it. But that's the end goal, is find your purpose, and you're never going to find it because it's always growing and evolving.
I like that analogy. Um, you and Rhett have written millions of words together,
Yeah.
probably at this point.
Yeah.
Have you developed a story shorthand that when you're beginning a new project, that you kind of both understand the structure that you write in, the things that you're trying to accomplish, no matter what the genre is, or really no matter what the story particulars are, there's going to be an arc that a Castle Bruno story is going to take. Like, how do you guys approach a new book at this point?
It's tough to answer that because we always, this is our first progression fantasy. We've written something like 15 books together, whatever it is. And because we own Athon, you've heard this before, we get the opportunity to write whatever we want and not have to worry about whether or not it's going to be successful or make money. You get to do what most authors don't get to do.
Right.
And so we've dabbled in a lot of things that we would suggest people don't write, weird Westerns being one of them.
Right.
So when a new project comes along that, we both agree this is going to be fun, let's do it together. Typically speaking, I just start writing it. That is not how Rhett wishes it would be done. But at this point in our career together, we've realized, we realized that works. Steve just throws words down, and I'm entirely fine with going, let's throw out these 10,000 words that I just wrote. I was establishing a character and a world and the stuff that we may want to do with this. And Rhett has always been the story guy. Rhett is a phenomenal storyteller. I've always been the words guy. Now, that doesn't mean I write most of the words, because I truly don't. But at the end of the day, I will write, like I'm 25,000 words into book 2 right now, and Rhett hasn't looked at it yet. Oh, that's not true. He read it and that's right. After I got to about 15,000 words, he decided, let me read this and come up with at least a very brief outline so that we know what direction we're going in. The reason I'm writing is because Rhett's working on Black Badge 3 right now. We're trying to get that finished, and I've written a bunch of that, and now he's kind of taken over and doing that. We're tag teaming the two things, and then we're going to switch, and I'm going to go back to Black Badge, and he's going to go to Hero 2, and there's a fair bit of chaos in how we do things.
Yeah.
We trust each other implicitly, which I think is important. Rhett just wrote 30-something thousand words on Black Badge, and I don't have a clue what he just wrote. When I wrote those 15, 20,000 words on Hero 2, he had no idea what I was writing. And he just trusted me to start the book out how it needed to be, and I'm trusting him to end Black Badge the way that it needs to be. We have rough ideas, but like super rough. Like, here's the one thing that needs to happen by the end of the Black Badge series. And I've written into the first 60,000 words, and then he took it from there. And I'm like, cool, I can't wait to see it. And
I can't wait to see what we wrote.
And what's cool is, like, when I do get it, if I want to change everything about it, as long as it's good, he's not going to care. And I feel the same way about my words. We're not precious about our words. As long as the goal is achieved, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. You said earlier that Athon is probably the largest publisher of LitRPG, progression fantasy, whatever tag you want to put on it at this point. Because I was friends with you and Rhett before Athon, and kind of followed along with your journey all along. I don't think either one of you saw LitRPG coming into your life at the time. How did all of that happen, and what do you think about kind of where all of this has mushroomed, has wound up in your life?
Well, when we started Athon, Hank was actually one of the Kickstarter donors. We did a $4,000 Kickstarter to start this company.
Yep.
And some of that was just for awareness. Some of that was because I was broke, and Rhett, just like $4,000. I don't know what it's going to do, but let's do something.
Yeah.
We started in science fiction and fantasy because that's our heart. LitRPG was not quite on the map yet in nearly the way it is now. There were some authors doing it, but it was a confusing time period where a bunch of readers were kind of trying to pull this thing that they were doing in Russia and Japan over into the US. And so when it first started, it was really rough, really, really rough. And I don't mean that about all the authors, but the genre itself was just rough. And so it was hard to find anything that was sort of well written in the genre. And so it wasn't on our radar at first. And then He Who Fights with Monsters came along by Shirtaloon and was just such a wild, wild success that opened the door to a whole lot of other authors that went, hey, you guys did a great job with monsters. Like, what can you do with us? And of course, then we got J.F. Brink, and he's the first to fire, who did Defiance of the Fall, and Mark of the Fool came along, and Primal Hunter came along, and all these things that really helped establish us not only as publishers who knew what was good in the genre, but a lot of times authors will come to us and they'll go, well, what can you do that I can't do? Get book covers, get editing, stuff like that. And the answer is no, but yes. I can't tell you how many great authors I see that I look at their book covers and go, I wouldn't piss on that if it was on fire. Excuse the phrase, I guess. But a lot of authors are not authorpreneurs, and they don't understand what a good book cover looks like. And I've creative directed every single book cover that we've had for 7 years. And I study the market and kind of know what those things are. And so we entered into LitRPG a little bit blind. And I say this with humility. And if any of the other publishers or authors hear this, please don't take this with so much take it with a grain of salt, but Athon really helped establish what lit RPG is. Not just like we fell into it or anything. We helped establish it. And so when you look at what lit RPG is today, I would say that there's a good portion of that we can attribute to what we've done with it. I kind of look at book covers today and I go, again, I say this humbly and I hope it doesn't sound awful, but I look at that and I go, I'm the reason people are doing this particular thing to establish that it is lit RPG, right? There's a certain look to things.
There's certain hallmarks of it.
Yep.
That just become iconography of a certain genre. Sure.
Right. And so it's both humbling and makes me very proud that I could have such an impact on a genre that we'll look at for, you type in lit RPG in Google and like, you're going to see Athon books in Amazon. You're going to see our little bird everywhere that you go. And I don't take that for granted. It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
Especially convincing a lot of these authors that we knew what we were doing. Because Rhett and I don't have the career author-wise that a lot of these guys do. We have a decent writing career, don't misunderstand, but we're not Shirtaloon. We're not, some of these huge names. And so there were a few authors that came along. Blaze Corvin was one of them. He was adamantly against us, verbally, vocally, in the public. And then he met us and talked to us and immediately signed over to us and has been one of our best advocates in the genre, that these guys are not taking advantage of authors and just trying to make money on them and all of that stuff. Like, that's not our heart. It never has been our heart. And I think I'm hopeful that can be seen in the community, that we truly care about the lit RPG community and making it better and making it stronger.
Yeah, I love that. And there's nothing more satisfying than taking someone that was a vocal opponent and them coming over to your side through nothing more than just understanding and mutual talk and sharing. With National Novel Writing Month coming up, and we've got a lot of people that are starting to write a novel for the first time, or just really trying to find a way to express themselves, and which is the way that a lot of writers begin. I think a lot of writers don't begin thinking they're going to have a career as a published novelist. They just want to find a way to share the story that they feel like is inside of them. And it sounds to me a lot like that lit RPG is one of these genres that came about from people that were writing just for the fun of it, just because they wanted to tell a story that they thought was fun. Maybe a few friends will think that it's fun, and this is just kind of an extension of what we love to do. And now these people that were just kind of writing for fun find themselves as like writing professionals and as cornerstones of the publishing industry, and in this kind of weird way, Shirtaloon and folks like that were publishing their works, or I'm grasping at the website you mentioned earlier, the
Royal Road.
Royal Road. A lot of that's people that are just publishing there for the fun of it, and there have been lots of sites that have popped up over the years. And now that's becoming a mature industry. What kind of advice would you give to someone that's just wanting to start writing for the fun of it? Maybe it turns into something, maybe it doesn't. Like, does everything that you do have to turn into a career choice?
I would say there's very few authors that go out there looking for a career that find it. For every successful author, there's 100,000 not successful authors. And so at the end of the day, the only reason you should be writing is because it's fun. Sort of once you maybe make it, so to speak, then you write for a paycheck, then you write for that. But like, one of the pieces of advice we give every author is don't quit your day job. And we say it with love, but the reality is, like, that's how harsh this industry is. You might have something making hundreds of $1,000s a month, and you might start living like it's making hundreds of thousands a month. And then 8 months later, you're pulling in $50 a month. And that is very, very normal for this industry. So my advice to anyone that's wanting to write for the first time, or whatever, is like, write because it's fun and not because you think you could make a living. Does that answer the question, or is that not the question?
Yeah. Like,
Okay.
And I know you started writing before a publishing company came out of it, before, really before you were successful, or had any ideas of being successful. What was the thing that got you motivated in the beginning? Was it just the love of telling stories? Was it creating with friends? What was that initial draw that really kind of lit your storytelling on fire?
I think you nailed it, right? It's the love of telling stories. It's the love of creating, especially world building, and just being able to. Rhett kind of has a joke. He hates writing, but he loves having writ.
Yes.
And the moment when you have a finished book and it's on your shelf, or your cover is printed out on the wall, or whatever that might be, like, there's just a sense of accomplishment there. And when I first started writing, I was writing with a guy named Aaron Hall. We finished writing a book, and the next day I was like, cool, what are we writing next? And his response was like, what do you mean, what are we writing next? I'm taking a break. I'm done. And there's there's two different kinds of people, right? There's the guy that's like, I can't get enough of this thing that we just did. Let's move on to the next thing. And then there's somebody who could take a break forever. I happen to be somebody who, I'm not happy if I'm not writing something, even if it's nothing.
Yeah.
And so I'm always working on the next project, or next 3 or 4 projects. Because at the end of the day, like, it might be successful, it might not be, but it's mine, and it's done, and it's something I could look at and go, I wrote that.
Love it. Well, the new book is An Unexpected Hero, an Isekai lit RPG adventure. Unexpected Hero is book number 1. What's the series gonna is the series gonna be Unexpected?
An Unexpected Hero. Yep.
Okay, I love it. I know you said you're about a quarter of the way into the new book, or book 2. I know it's just launch day for book 1, but do you have an idea for a publishing schedule that you're going to shoot for?
Yeah, we always aim for no more than 3 months. The goal will be to be done and finished by the time 3 months hits. We can release that book and have it out there.
Excellent. We look forward to it. Go grab your copy of An Unexpected Hero today. We'll put links to it in the show notes. The audiobook, I have to say, is, if not all books I can say this about, but the audiobook is a preferred format for this book.
I agree.
If you're on the fence, if you've got an Audible credit, go use it on this book. You will not be disappointed, I promise. Steve, always a pleasure to get to hang out and chat and catch up. Tell folks where they can find you, and what's the best place for all things Jaime Castle, Steve Beaulieu, Athon Books, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I would say JaimeCastle.com, and then athonbooks.com, AETHON books.com.
Excellent. We'll link those up in the show notes as well. Steve, thank you so much, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.